Hey guys, welcome back to the Another Excuse podcast, where we chat to founders, creators, and self-starters about how they started and where they are now. Today's guest is Ipshita Kumar, the VP of Brand Innovation at Hype, a Web3 creative and marketing agency. In our discussion today, we cover things like what Hype does and how important it is for brands to look towards tech innovation so they can improve their service offerings as well as strengthen the way they communicate with their communities. And we also talk about how important it is to get beyond the jargon that is used within Web3. That's just a taste of what we cover. We cover a whole range of things, and it's a really interesting conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Enjoy the show. Hey Ipshita, thank you for joining me today. There are so many directions we can take this conversation, and I'm looking forward to exploring all of them. But I'd like to start with your current role as VP of Brand Innovation at Hype. Could you explain what your role entails and what you guys do at Hype?
Yeah, of course. First off, I'm very happy to be here. So thank you for having me, Byron. Hype's been one of the leading crypto marketing agencies since 2017, which probably means that they have seen all the different hype cycles more than any other native agency has, right? So when I joined Hype about 2 years ago, back then there was no department for NFTs and the NFT market was on the boom. And by then, Hype was already a market leader. So they were already working with some of the largest ecosystem players in Web3. And my role back then was to understand how can we extend our service offering of the agency for NFT projects. And as I started working within the role, I realized that NFT is a very small subset of what we'd call innovation today. So think of AI, AR, VR, the metaverse, and then NFTs as well, or even just using blockchain specifically in your supply chain as a brand to make a lot more transparent transactions. So I started looking at this whole space as more of an innovation, and that's where my role transitioned into leading the brand innovation studio at Hype. So what we do is we work with heritage brands, so what you call as Web2 brands today, and help them map out what their Web3 strategy would look like. So pretty much similar to maybe 5-10 years ago, where brands would hire agency to map out their e-commerce strategy or their online presence. We're kind of doing the same thing for them on chain. So it starts from everything from research, strategy, to even coming up with really cool campaign concepts and making sure that we execute it with the help of our 100 people strong agency that we have at Hype.
Great. I feel like you're in a unique position where you understand both worlds and you connect them in the simplest way possible. Why is it important for Web2 or legacy brands to explore opportunities in the Web3 space?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually one of the dominating questions that we get asked when we're even having the initial conversations with legacy brands. And we let them know that, like with time, you are essentially looking at consumers that haven't changed much, but the way they interact and what they do and where they hang out has changed. So just the way you have brands in the last 5-6 years contemplating if they should even have a social media department or a social media profile. And today, a lot of them have massive teams that take care of content and distribution and ads on social media platforms that directly report into what we call today's digital marketing. We're just kind of looking at the new iteration of how do you connect back with your consumers today and over the next 5 years. So blockchain technology obviously presents this amazing opportunity. So that's why a lot of brands are thinking, does it make sense for me to adopt? 100%. But would it be in the routes of NFTs, or do you want to do something in the gaming environment? That completely depends on you and what your brand strategy is. But the real reason comes down to every brand wants to connect with their consumers, and they will follow wherever consumers hang out. And if our natural places of hanging out are becoming more and more digital by the day, then it becomes increasingly important for brands to want to hang out, be present in those spaces so they can be at the top of mind of their final target audience.
That makes sense. But now for a lot of people listening, the world of Web3 is such a foreign place. It still is. Could you possibly give an example of a brand you have worked with where you incorporated Web3 into their model where it made sense and was a viable business decision?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I jump onto the example, you said something about viable business decision, right? Again, this is a big chunk of our introduction calls that we spend with brands, where they ask, how would it make business sense for us? Because it's not just me dropping money. I still have to go back to my boss. I have to go back to our regional bosses and explain to them how this would translate. Byron, if you're a brand, the ultimate goal you have is sell more products, right? You built an offline store to sell more products. You created an online store because you wanted to make it much more accessible for those who just don't like going to shop in physical places, so you can sell more products. You create an Instagram presence or a Facebook presence and then collaborate with influencers so that they can advertise your product. Why? To sell more products. You decide to sponsor a music festival or a conference. Why? Because you want that visibility so people think about your product, eventually buying more of your product. So I guess what I'm trying to say is defining a viable business decision means whatever decision I make today, will that somehow result in hitting my KPI and goals? And in this case, become sales of that specific product. Can be a watch, can be beer, can be makeup, can be anything. So a lot of brands, when they come to us, they are scared because they're like, what if I invest $500,000 and I have no idea how to measure that investment? And will I even have an ROI? So without naming the exact brand, because we're not allowed to, but we work with one of the portfolio brands of Pernod Ricard. So it falls under the alcohol bev industry. Now, their challenge was an interesting one because for the longest time, they have been pioneers at connecting with the younger audience by doing a lot of offline activations, a lot of, and really harnessing the street culture spirit. But then for them, it was important that how do we take this identity and bring it online, on chain? Do we try something completely different? Do we try to extend who we already are and extend that to an on-chain community? So that was one of our I'd say like one of our biggest projects that we worked on this year. And it was pretty much about, okay, if we were to look at strategy A, how would that impact your ROI? And it doesn't even have to be ROI tomorrow because you sold 10,000 pieces of NFT. It can simply be your ROI can be measured in 12 months, 16 months, but there has to be a way for them to measure it. And as long as we as an agency can make brands feel comfortable, that's where I think we would win, not just as an agency, but as enablers of this technology.
So yeah, that makes sense. I mean, a lot of people aren't going to make what they perceive as a risky investment if they can't measure the outcomes. So
100%.
you also work with Web3 native brands. In terms of providing value, how does your approach change between Web2 and Web3 brands?
That's a great question. So when we talk about Web3 brands, it could be brands that are born on chain, so the cultural brands. So think of how NFT projects like the Bored Ape, Pudgy Penguins, Doodles, they were born on chain through sales of NFTs, and then they transitioned into the offline spaces, whether they were through physical collectibles like Pudgy Penguin did, or is it Doodles that they're having collaborations and also physical spaces. So that's an interesting business model to look at. And then you have the traditional brands that were born off chain and now they're transitioning on chain. If you look at this as a circle, a brand that was born off chain wants to eventually go on chain, and the brand that was born on chain eventually wants to go offline, right? But in the end, in the middle, you always have the community. So you're always thinking, what will my next step be that will drive value for my community? So in terms of our approach, it always stays very similar. That is, your North Star is your community. People who are going to love your product, they're going to rave about your product, they're going to invite their friends who are going to invite their friends to come and use your product. So your core focus is always community. The only difference here is that you don't have to explain a lot of jargon. to a Web3 community or a Web3 brand because you already know it. And that's what makes it a lot more fun. Whereas for a Web2 brand, you're still kind of like holding their hand and walking them through the basics.
Yeah, I agree. Web3 is notoriously known for a ridiculous amount of jargon, and it can be extremely isolating at times. What's your view on the use of jargon in Web3, and do you think it will stick around? How do you handle that with your legacy clients?
Yeah, it won't. So we are going to see jargon being dropped, and in fact, we've already seen a lot of leading examples like Reddit using the word collectibles. Because in the end, think about it, they are collectibles. They're just digital collectibles that also happen to be on chain. So we're doing the same exact thing, but just in a different way. So we will see more and more brands adopt the Web3 technology, the blockchain technology, but also making sure that the jargon is in the background, not in forefront. Because what you have to understand is, if you're pushing towards mass adoption, is it easier to take the technology, let it be in the background, and then communicate with your wider audience, or spend time educating them about the technology, which they anyway don't care about, and then onboard them? Probably the first route, right? So I do think that more and more brands are going to want to adopt the technology without wanting to use the jargon, and we're already seeing those examples.
Yeah, I think when Web3 initially started gaining traction, I think the jargon sort of acted as a moat.
Yeah.
People felt sort of special to be in this little bubble where they know how it all works and others don't. But then when you come to mass adoption and wanting to educate people, you feel like this jargon is so important to the product you're building. But in essence, it actually isn't important at all. It's whether your new customers enjoy the product and can use it easily. That's like the main point of it all.
Absolutely. And even when we speak with brands, we make it a point that even in our decks, in our pitches, we never use the jargon. We use maybe like one or two very obvious words, but then as we're presenting, we let go of it just because it just makes the brands more comfortable. If they're able to understand you, imagine how much easier it is for them to work with you. If you want to create a layer of jargon and exclusivity that, oh, I know how this works, then you're not really helping anyone, are you? Right? Think about it like this, Byron. We are on Riverside. We're recording this podcast, but do you really care about all the jargon and then the tech features from the coding standpoint? No. You just want to make sure that it's streaming, that you can mute yourself when you want, you can turn the camera on, and that's all that you care. Then why are we making it more and more complicated in Web3?
Yeah, I agree. The example I like to use is NFC technology, how we pay with credit cards. No one knows how it works. They just know that money leaves their account and pays whoever they need to pay. It feels like Web3 sort of did it backwards, where it was the bare bones exposed to everyone so people could sort of learn how it works. Whereas there's been moats in the Web2 world where they built the technology in the background and just delivered customer-facing products. So it's like the situation and the sequence of events has changed.
I mean, you've either used Google Pay or Apple Pay at some point. In India, we have Paytm, which is another payment provider. We've used digital wallets for the longest time. If you're signing up on an app, it automatically creates a wallet, and then you're able to collect money in their native currency. Then you can get it paid out to you by connecting your PayPal account. Like, at least with a lot of platforms that used to happen. We've been using digital forms of wallets. It's just that it was never in self-custody, right? And then there is just no reason why we should be creating another layer of jargon. It's just so much easier to explain to someone, saying, oh, but you've used Apple Wallet, Apple Pay. Yeah. Well, it's kind of similar. It's just on chain. All your transactions are recorded. You have access to your own money, and your wallet is your own. It's not managed by anyone. It's just so much easier to explain it this way.
Yeah. And to help battle this jargon issue, Hype has been creating some very informative reports. What are you trying to achieve with these Hype reports?
Yeah, so I want to take you back, in the past, a bit like of historical background on Hype research. So sometime early last year, my CEO Jake and I, when we were talking about how brands would enter, that was actually the moment where we saw some of the leading brands like Nike acquired Artifact, and right after Adidas did their first drop, and then we saw Prada do something, and then Gucci. So it was almost like back to back. Every 48 hours, we were seeing something really cool happen within the brand ecosystem. Now, I understood this. Jake understood this. Everyone else within the agency and anyone who works in Web3 probably understood this. But I started thinking that how would a brand manager of Adidas or Gucci sitting out Southeast Asia or South America look at this on LinkedIn saying, oh my God, their parent company made this crazy amount of money by doing an NFT sale, but they have no clue. Why? Because they don't understand the jargon. So for us, it was important to first make it accessible to absolutely any and every brand manager who's following different people on LinkedIn or on Twitter or different company accounts. So when they do see these astronomical numbers of sales made by Budweiser, at least the regional heads also have access to the same information, because then once they understood it, it's so much easier for them to say, hey, listen, I understand how this system works. What if we replicated the same thing in a hyper-local manner? So that was the motivation of how we wanted to do it. And our goal was we'll make these reports free. And then we'll just make sure that anyone and everyone can have access to it, because knowledge is power. And then that led to our first 7 reports on brands. And then this year, we want to do something different. We didn't want to just reverse engineer a brand. We want to reverse engineer an entire industry and do it with some really awesome partners. So just last month, we released our this year's first report. It's basically mapping out what the state of the food and beverage industry is when it comes to blockchain technology, and really looking at the utilities that are currently being offered to consumers. Is it matching the expectations of the consumers? Is this what they want? Which brands are winning in this round? Which brands can have a lot more work to do? So really giving the industry a highlight. And as we're speaking, we're going to be launching our next report in the next 5 to 10 days, which will be focusing on another industry. So stay tuned for that.
Awesome. I feel like the food and beverage industry is an interesting one because there's so many brands and restaurants have sort of attempted a copy and paste approach, and it hasn't been that successful. And then the ones that have had like a unique, intentional brand strategy approach have actually done really well. Like Starbucks being as big as it is, just doing the loyalty program to start with seems like such a better approach than like, hey guys, we're doing 10,000 NFTs and these NFTs give you some perks. And it sort of falls on its face because it like with the jargon, it's isolating and people are like, well, I enjoy the restaurant anyway, so why do I need a picture to enjoy the food more or get discounts? It's like a bit confusing. So there's success stories, but there's also quite a few failures. So I'm sure it's a very interesting report.
Yeah, and what we sometimes also fail to recognize, I feel, is that in the midst of all these really big brands making waves, there are also like other local brands that are adopting this tech at a much faster rate, because obviously the approval levels and then all the I'd say like restrictions that a more heritage brand would have, they wouldn't have necessarily. So I absolutely love what the guys at Flaunt are doing. So they are an enterprise solution for anyone that wants to actually take their existing loyalty program on-chain or wants to build their own on-chain loyalty program. And they've been working, well, I'm just going to drop it here in chat, with Wow, and they are, if I'm not wrong, an Asian food chain based out of the US. And they've created for them a Hot Buns Club. So basically, the more you interact with the actual restaurant, the more you order. For different milestones, you could be owning different collectibles, which then obviously result in a redeemable for the final consumer. Again, did you know about Wow? Probably not. I didn't. I also don't live in the US, but when you see examples like this is what excites me, is how can small to medium businesses adopt this technology and just integrate it in such a seamless manner that that you don't like, that's it. You don't even feel like you're using Web3 tech because it doesn't really matter. All I want to do is become an awesome Hot Buns Club member, earn a lot of rewards, and then get redeem that for something really cool.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the next step, once we're on that sort of loyalty program level where you own an asset that can unlock certain perks, the next step will then be that, like, hey, you own quite a few of these and you can actually sell them to other people who want to collect different types. But it's like one step at a time. And the brand 2 into, I mean, the web 2 into the web 3, it's like we can't do it all at once because it's very overwhelming. But I think that is the next step. It's like you actually own this. It's not just something on your Google Wallet or your Apple Pay. It's like you can sell it to someone else who's looking to collect that particular one or something.
100%.
And now, speaking of ownership, there's ownership, and I've heard you speak about psychological ownership before. Could you explain the difference between them and explain why they're so important in the context of brands entering the Web3 space?
Absolutely. The way I would differentiate is ownership is something that you buy and it's yours, or it's something that has been passed down to you, hereditary. And that's just pure ownership. That is, this is mine. But psychological ownership is when you actually feel the emotional attachment to a product to say that this is my product, and it comes from a different place. It comes from a place of not because you bought it with money, but because you played an active role to a point that it has now it's operating at your self-identity level, right? So like a couple of weeks ago, I was hosting a workshop with my team on at what scale, at what point do brands win? And then we were talking about a pyramid of how there are brands at an awareness stage, and there's brands at a stage where they're known for their quality. And then there's the next stage is when brands are known for being market leaders in that specific industry. And then there is the next stage where we're talking about trust. That's it. This specific brand has never failed me. I trust them. They're not just the market leaders, not just that the quality is really good, but I just trust these guys to deliver every single time. Then you have the association level, the second last level, where you're starting to associate the brand with the specific memory cord. So think of in India, where I grew up, we had Born Vita, which is like the cocoa powder. So that's like operating at my association level. Every time I smell Born Vita, and then every time I see it, I associate it with my childhood. But then you have ideology level, which is like the highest level where every brand wishes to operate at. What does it mean is that you have reached a level where your consumers, your buyers are connecting with your brand and your product at a self-identity level. It goes hand in hand with who they are. So as every brand tries to reach this specific level, I'd say that the more a brand is perceived as a utility or a commodity, the less harder it gets for them to reach this level. So when you're talking about psychological ownership, think of products like Lego, people who just love playing with Legos, even adults. I've spent a crazy amount of hours building the Lego Taj Mahal or the Lego Empire State. Why? And then in the end, I love it. I cherish it. But in the end, it's just blocks that you put together for it to look like a replica of something. But no, I've spent time and energy with maybe my friends or my partners to build this, and hence I have psychological ownership that this is mine. Think of IKEA furniture. I could also pay $50 extra to have someone come in and assemble. But the moment I build that first bed with my partner, when I move into the house, that's it. The bed just means something completely different. Why? Because I've invested time and energy into building that product. Now, let's take that to what we're seeing today in terms of Web3. The ability for a community to co-create a product with the brand has been made possible thanks to blockchain, because you have smart contracts that are able to where you're able to put in rules that certain people get certain amount of royalty when that product is sold, or a rev share, or also to showcase who all were the building blocks of this specific product. So today's generation wants to be more involved in building those products. They want to have a voice. They want to co-design, co-create, co-own a lot of products. So when you're talking about this collaborative way of building products, you automatically create psychological ownership with your community. And that's when brands are going to start operating at a level of ideology, because you'll have at least, imagine like 10 people saying, hey, by the way, the collection that you see of Puma on the runway, these community members helped build, co-create this with the head designer, creative designer of Puma. That's a very powerful statement to say. And that's what the newer generation is chasing, and brands are starting to realize the importance of it.
Yeah, so you touched on it a bit there. These new forms of ownership help mobilize and incentivize communities in ways that weren't possible before. Is it important, or how important is it for a brand to focus on community, or even shift their focus onto building a community?
Yeah, so I'd say like brands have always had a community. Think about it, right? In the offline era and the brick and mortar, you always had word of mouth that led to you building a solid community of people who just love your brand. In the online space, where you have where your community can be measured with the number of followers you have, or the number of subscribers you have. So brands have always been aware and familiar with the word community. But then what makes it different today is that what your community wants has changed. Back when you're posting content, you expect your community to like, share, comment, add it to their story through social media platforms. But today, your community wants to be involved in co-creation of your brand, and having a leading voice, and also wanting a piece of the profit, because they're spending time in shaping the brand, but also being your advocate. So brands have always been aware of communities. They've always built communities. It's just that you're doing it a little bit differently today, because your community wants different things and they don't want the same things anymore.
Quick interruption from me. The podcast is starting to gain traction, which is amazing. And thank you so much for the support. If I could ask you to do one little thing, could you please rate this podcast on whichever podcast platform you listen on? That little action goes a lot further than you think and would really help the podcast grow. Thanks in advance. I really appreciate it. Back to the episode. Yeah, and one thing I noticed when I got involved in the Web3 space is there's now sort of a next level of community. It's not just following your favorite brands, liking and commenting. It's putting this community into a specific space where they can communicate with one another. And so you create a deeper connection because you're finding people that identify with the same brand. You have something in common, and it's creating a unique connection that I hadn't previously experienced before. I know a lot of gamers and stuff have experienced that before, and I'm not a big gamer. So when I found NFT communities, it sort of blew my mind how like we have this shared drive for this brand to succeed, or wanting to contribute to the success of this brand, but we're sharing it with other people.
Exactly. And it makes such a big difference when you feel that you have the accessibility. And then think about it like this, right? Maybe it doesn't work anymore today, but let's go back maybe 12 months or 24 months ago, where recognition from brands could come in the shape or form as, Byron, I want to make you my Discord moderator. And you're like, holy shit, I get to be a moderator for such a huge brand. And these are just small touch points that brands are doing with their active community members by rewarding them specific roles that they would play in shaping the brand of tomorrow. And it's small things like this that actually motivate the newer generation more than monetary fulfillment of or gift cards or anything. Maybe that will appeal to a different generation, but the generation of tomorrow, for them, community means, how can I help you grow? What can I actually do to develop your product in a different way? And that's a very thin margin where a lot of brands are missing it, but also a lot of brands are winning at it.
Yeah, I think it's also in a sense, an easy win. It's just never been the approach for brands. So if you
Yeah.
can give your community the opportunity to put their stamp on
Yes.
whatever you're creating next, sort of like what Dot Swoosh did with Nike and how they got a whole lot of designers to create their own Air Max designs, and the winners then their designs got sold as NFTs. It's so simple, and you're actually outsourcing the design of your NFTs. It's like it's a win-win, but now your whole
Yeah.
community feels like they have their stamp on it. And if you aren't a designer, you still appreciate that like the community helped create this, and it just feels more special. But the brand didn't have to do much extra.
I think my favorite moment in future, and I'm already waiting for it. I can't wait, and hopefully I get to work with a brand on this. But maybe I would just hear it before. Is to see a leading brand hire their newest creative director from their Web3 community. It's going to happen. Maybe it doesn't happen now. It doesn't happen in the next 6 months. But it would be interesting to see how these brands can have these momentary challenges or quests that they give their community members to do in terms of co-designing. And then one day, the future creative director of brand X emerges from that community. And this person would maybe not have necessarily gone to the best fashion school, maybe even would not have been living in the top tier fashion cities, but just by being an active member and applying his or her design skills is now able to proudly say, I am the new creative director for a brand. And that is going to be a very beautiful moment. That's how you democratize and empower the larger creator community.
Definitely. We saw that happening in a few NFT projects where they held sort of art contests and things like that.
Yeah.
And you just see the rarely talented people appearing again and again. And like the whole community votes on their favorite pieces and stuff. And then eventually some of these great artists got hired and became part of the team, because
Yep.
you can't let talent like that just fall to the wayside. And they are invested in the community. They're in the chat. They're noticing that these competitions are going on. So it's a win-win. They're already on your side, and now you've got talent. It's pretty cool.
The landscape of recruitment, the landscape of co-creation and ownership, everything's changing, and it's such an exciting time. Again, if you put the jargon behind you, you just cut the jargon. It's so beautiful.
Definitely. And so you mentioned that you were brought up in India. Do you think your upbringing has provided you with a unique perspective into the industries you work in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think going even beyond being born and raised in India, it was also about how I come from hospitality and tourism industry. So I went to Spain, Marbella, to study hospitality and tourism. Again, very anti what you'd normally see in India for a family to send their kid to study hospitality. And thanks to that, I was able to then live and work in over 5 to 6 different cities and different hotels, which also meant that by default, I was always surrounded by a very multicultural friend circle, as well as a working circle, just because that's what you need in a hotel. You need people speaking different languages, coming from different cities. So it's really shaped the different life experiences has really shaped who I am today. And I feel that when you even look at Web3, it's usually the people who have had the most varied life experiences can bring a lot of color into the industry, because they bring new and fresh perspective that are not just tech first, but they're also let's say experience first or community first, and then that's also the beauty. So sorry, to go back to your initial question, 100%. It's definitely defined and shaped who I am today and how I even perceive opportunities.
You touched on it a bit there, saying it's not sort of the traditional career path for someone, particularly in India. Did your parents have an opinion on the non-traditional career path that you've taken?
No, they were the enablers, actually. So as I was finishing my high school, I did the classic SATs, AP. My AP scores are super high. I got a really good SAT score. Then I filled the common application, applied to my dream school and safety school. So now I went through that entire journey, and then my dad came and he said, just apply to hospitality school. And by then I was already running 4 food blogs, and I had already traveled about 5 different countries as a professional dancer. So art has always been a part of who I've always been. And I was traveling for dance. I was writing about food. And this is like back in the days where you had like WordPress and Blogspot, like traditional blog writing. And my dad said, why don't you apply to a hospitality school? I'm like, but what do you mean? Like, I'm going to go to international law and I'm going to save the world. That's all good. But are you passionate about it? You're going to spend an insane amount of time studying and then looking for a job. Why don't you just do something that you're so passionate about, and you can immediately start working and applying that passion? And I thought, okay, I'm going to apply for it. And I had my dream school. Like one of them I got through, and then the other one was La Roche, which the hospitality school. And my parents just said, listen, like, just go here. Just like, what are you going to do? Just go study hospitality. And that's it. So they were the biggest enablers, in fact, for me taking this decision.
That's great. That's amazing. And you mentioned you're running 4 food blogs. How did you discover a passion like that at such a young age? I feel like before I was going to university, I had a slightly different approach where I thought I would just do what sounded like a pretty impressive degree. And I didn't give it much thought. I wasn't pursuing as many passions as I wish I had now with hindsight. But what gave you the drive to sort of run 4 food blogs and follow a passion like that?
So in India, as a kid, you have to be doing at least 2 extracurricular activities since you're a kid. So it's very common if you meet an Indian kid and you ask them, hey, what did you do as you were growing up besides studying? And he'll say, oh, I played the guitar, I was in a choir, I used to dance. So it's very common to see. In my case, I just didn't like the extracurricular activities that were available in India back then. So there was no cooking class for a 12-year-old to go to. And even if they were not advanced at all. There were dance classes, but no one back then, this is like 2002, 2001, no one back then was even like doing belly dancing in India. Everybody did like the classical Indian dance or jazz. So every time my mom would travel, and she would travel via Dubai because all flights would connect to Europe via Dubai, I was like, Mom, all you have to do is get me those belly dancing tutorial DVDs, and I would put it on and I would learn how to dance. And then that kind of became such a big passion that I started traveling outside India to go to Europe to dance, basically, for a lot of like cultural performances. So I've always wanted to explore a more creative path, especially options that was not available to me at home and in India. And that kind of like led to, running food blogs, as well as the dancing, a form of dance that was just not seen as a form of dance or recognized as a form of dance in India back then. I don't know. And I don't know if it helps, but I am a single child. So you do get really bored. So you have to entertain yourself because your parents are working. So I would always find ways to entertain myself. And these were the 2 outlets back then.
That's great. And India is such a fast-growing economy with a lot of potential. What kind of impact do you see the country having on tech innovation going forward?
That's a very interesting question. It's crazy. I mean, by 2025, it's expected that India's internet population would reach 900 million. That's insane. And imagine if 900 people have access to internet, especially with all the new AI tools that are coming up and making everything from website creation to a company formation so easy and seamless. Imagine what an economy of 900 million people having access to internet could do if it's all channeled the right way. So I'm very bullish on where India will go with this, and I can't wait to see more. And it makes me very proud to be one of them.
I'm also very intrigued, and I think India is going to play a very vital role in sort of the next step of where tech goes and this whole AI thing. I think it's going to be fascinating. From the outside looking in, we've touched on a few things and how you went into hospitality after your parents gave you that push. Have you? Yeah. You've had, it seems like a pretty calculated career path. Would you agree with that statement?
Not at all. Not at all. Um, I did not calculate. If you asked me 5 years ago if I knew I'd be working in emerging tech, no way. If you ask me 10 years ago if I would ever leave hospitality, uh, the answer would be no, because when I initially joined, I wanted to be a GM of Four Seasons Resort in Bora Bora. Because, back then it was like my 21-year-old Ipshita, that's what it like for me, that's what I aspired. But I feel that I was always open to new opportunities, and I've always wanted to do things that was not considered normal, especially like in the Indian culture in my family. So I've always been very open to what's next, what's new, and more often than not, my answer to that has been yes, let's do it. Um, so have I been very calculated? Not at all, because all of these moves, it didn't happen to me. I would say, like, when the opportunity was presented, I took it and I ran with it. And I think that's the fun part about life. I feel like we don't have a lot more surprises these days because everything is so calculated. So being able to kind of sense check where that moment is and just going with the flow keeps you on top of your toes. I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for.
Yeah, I find it fascinating because a lot of people, when opportunities do come their way, a lot of the time they let fear get the better of them and they don't
Yep.
make those decisions. They stay in that job that they've had for years because it's safe. They know what to expect. Is it something that you've worked on where you sort of like tell yourself if there's an opportunity you didn't take, is it like, okay, next time I need to take that opportunity? Is it something that you've always had? Like it's just ingrained in you to just go after those opportunities when they come?
I'd say maybe a lot of it stems from my family because both my parents worked in private sectors. So in India, if you're not working in public sector for the government, then you're essentially kind of like funding everything for yourself. And just being able to see them come from that background, hustling and struggling, and then also like making it, and then also seeing them be fearless in taking leaps, because sometimes when you do things from a place of fear, it kind of stops you from reaching your full potential. But I've always seen them be completely fearless about how they made decisions, how they looked at opportunities. And of course, I would like to think and believe that a lot of that comes from there because my upbringing was in the same household. And also, I would say that as an immigrant, right? Like when I left India to go study in Spain and then work there, and then today I'm working and living in Portugal. Um, I always felt that there was a certain amount of responsibility I had to make sure that, everything is good. I'm paying my taxes, like life is doing fine. But then I always thought that's boring. If I'm meant to be here, I will be here irrespective of the life choices I make. If I'm not, I'm not. So I never let what my next step in career would be a blocker for the security I wanted. I felt like if I'm secure in my head and I have full security about my skill set, then everything can be achievable. And that's just kind of helped me take more leaps. And I'm also open to the fact that there will be moments where I will go back and that's a wrong decision and I failed at that. And that's okay. Otherwise, life's not fun.
Yeah. And sometimes those wrong decisions are equally as important because you learn so much from them.
100%.
Have you ever struggled with burnout? Or if you have, how have you dealt with it?
I've struggled with burnout a lot of times throughout my career. And at each stage, burnout just looks and feels different. And it's about you being able to recognize it. Like if you have a burnout 10 years ago, which is a completely different career milestone that I was in, is very different from today, because 10 years ago, maybe I was not managing a team and I was not managing an entire department. And then today I am. And then maybe 5 years down the line, I might be managing my own business with maybe a family. So burnouts come in all shapes and sizes. And it's just so important to be able to recognize it early on. And for me, it's always what's helped is just family time. And whether that's family time at home or going away for a weekend, spending time with your parents, spending time with your partner, just because for me it's the moments where I need the most care and love. And I tend to forget that because you're in this cycle of get work done, get the output level high. So for me, taking care of burnout or dealing with burnout has always been going back to family and just spending time, and you just feel so refreshed. And yes, of course, a spa is helpful, and I will go for occasional dinners with nothing. I mean, I would go to a spa with my mom, and that would be more beneficial than going alone. So, like, it's just being able to spend time with your loved ones is just amazing because they know you more than anyone else. So, although you were going through a burnout, they have been observing what you're doing and they have a much more zoomed out perspective. And sometimes advice comes in moments from them when you're like, you're right here. All right.
Yeah, I think that is so important to just connect with family regularly. And to close off, I have a few final questions. Do you have any advice or resources you'd suggest to learn more about the space?
You mean Web3 specifically?
Yes, about the Web3 space, just for people who are intrigued but still a bit nervous or unclear of where to even begin.
Yeah, I would say just start. I think the main problem is that people don't start because they feel overwhelmed to start. Currently, you have so many different places where you can get resources on understanding the basics. Anywhere from Gemini's Cryptopedia, is it called, I think it's called Cryptopedia Gemini's Cryptopedia, all the way down to standalone advisors making their own YouTube videos on Web3, with blockchain. So helping you bust these jargons. So I'd say the most important part is just start. And how to start can depend on if you already have friends that are working in this space. Just invite them for a coffee or a dinner and be like, listen, how about I take you out for a coffee and I want to know everything that you do in your job and why do you think it would impact the next generation or like how we would shop and eat and live in the next 5 years. That's a great way. And this way, what you're saying is I'm eager to learn and I want to do it from my trusted source. People who don't have friends and family who are working in Web3, like I said, you have a lot of internet resources as long as you have Wi-Fi with you, internet connection, you have access to all the information. So get started. And once you get started, you'll start finding that your interests will automatically emerge in certain hot pockets of Web3. And then once you identify those, then you can start joining the right communities, whether they're on Discord or Telegram. You can start following the right authors in the space who write their own independent newsletter about the industry. So like I said, just get started. And a lot of times what people think is getting started means, oh, I need to invest in Bitcoin. No, all you have to do is just go start reading about it. And that's when we'll start understanding, what are you more skewed towards? Are you skewed towards trading? Are you skewed towards the permissionlessness of this entire technology? Are you skewed towards how it will empower creators? And once you know that, then you're like, okay, fine. If I love empowering creators, what are the different platforms that are building in this space? Who are the authors that are writing about it? What kind of podcasts can I listen to get more familiar? And then you kind of start that journey there.
That's great advice. And to end every podcast, I flip the script and ask whether you have a question for me.
Yes, I do. I do. How did you start on your Web3 journey, Byron?
I think like a lot of people, it was money driven. I started with crypto investing, watching hours and hours of YouTube videos. You start just understanding the fundamentals of Bitcoin and Ethereum. But I always found that long-term investing, although it's great and it's buy and hold, it wasn't as exciting for me. And then it became sort of two different paths. It was either like shitcoin trading, which is super risky but entertaining nonetheless, and it was like try this NFT thing, and I started because it was like bull market, people are making money, let me just buy some JPEGs, flip them, see what happens. And you have to enter these discords. There was like whitelist grinding at the beginning, and then those mechanisms evolved over time. But I was just fascinated by all the different dynamics and like the strength of these communities and psychology behind it. Like, these people have invested some money, and so like that psychological ownership and digital ownership, they are so invested in this community that actually a lot of like rationale just falls to the wayside. These people are like so gung-ho about this NFT or this project, and they're not looking at like all the wrong things with it and how these people might be doing a rug pull and just leaving with their money. They like don't want to believe that this could go wrong. And so I just found it fascinating watching all the dynamics, jumping into a Discord, looking at what the founders would say and be like, ooh, okay, I think these guys don't have everyone's best interests at heart. And so I started trying to look for patterns, and that's part of the investing, but it's also just like there's a marketing side of things where when you have to be more transparent because everyone knows how many NFTs there are. You can't use that sort of marketing scarcity model that a lot of brands use in e-commerce, where it's like last two, and then that final 2 items left stays on their website for months because you actually don't know how many items are left. So I just found how there's different tactics at play and how there was so much hype and groupthink. And I just found it fascinating. And so that's I started to make money, and I just stayed because there was so many things to learn in the space.
I love it because I think this brings us back to the previous point, right? Like, you just have to get started, and it doesn't matter how. Just dip your feet and toes in, and then you kind of like gradually transcend it because you were able to identify where all are you interested in that's beyond trading. And I think that's what a lot of people just need to do is like just get started. And sometimes the best and the free option is, and safest option as well, is through education and by learning. And I love it. But like, again, like a follow-up question to that, Byron, and I don't know if you have time for 2 questions because this is the second
sure.
one. How did you get into Web3 copywriting?
By getting involved with projects. I think it's almost like the NFT trader's journey. It's like not NFT trader's journey. It's just everyone's sort of life journey. There's levels to things, and once you accomplish that level, things can get a bit stale or boring. You're like, okay, I know how to do this. I've jumped into thousands of Discords. I've got whitelist for it. It becomes a bit trivial. And so the next level to that was working with projects and offering to help, even for free, so you can see the other side of things, see how these projects work, the decisions they're making. You're joining all the team meetings. And so I started joining a few teams and helping them with their marketing side of things. And so I was writing scripts for some nuggets, some YouTube videos, and I started writing content for their brand touch points, social media, things like that. And I just got involved that way. I just sort of put my hand up, didn't ask for anything in return, but the way they do it is they usually give you a few NFTs to, if you're a part of the team. And so, that was I just felt like that was the next logical step in my journey. Once you spend enough time in it, it doesn't become challenging enough. And because in the NFT space, when you know certain people or you're in certain groups, the whitelist opportunities start to just come automatically. And so that didn't feel like a game anymore. And so, it was just, to me, seemed like the next logical step. And that's how I ended up doing it.
I love it. You're a true born on-chain copywriter. I love it.
And I really enjoyed it. I learned so much. And it's quite funny jumping into Discord servers now, and they're basically ghost towns. It's quite rare to find an active Discord community because of our incentive structures and also the whole business model of like relying on royalties and things like that. It's just changed completely, and so a lot of people have just vanished.
I think a lot of brands and communities are starting to realize, or they haven't maybe, that what used to work 12 months ago, 24 months ago, just doesn't work anymore. People are changing, they're getting more and more educated, their expectations are also rising. A lot of people have been left feeling disheartened by certain projects, so they expect something completely different. So I do think there has to be a keen pulse for every community on how the consumer sentiment is changing, to obviously dictate what would excite my community. And if you're not asking that question every 6-7 months, then your Discord will become a ghost town.
Yeah. That's what I loved about the space too, was how quickly it iterated and learned from other projects. It was just so fast changing because they listened to their community. It was like, oh, this approach doesn't work, so we're going to try something different. And that would be a week after the whole community realized that something didn't work. Thank you for joining me today, Ipshita. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's amazing how you're able to simplify complicated terminology and make Web3 understandable and approachable. If people want to learn more or contact you, how can they do so?
They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I go by Ipshita Kumar, or they can drop me an email. It's my first name, Ipshita, KR@gmail.com. So I'm always responsive over email, but also LinkedIn. So whatever is easiest.
Great. Thanks again, and speak soon. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed the episode. One more quick reminder before you go. I have a weekly newsletter by the same name, Another Excuse, where I cover 4 topics: something that has changed my perception, a tool that could be useful to you, content that is actually worth consuming, and a concept that I try break down and explain. If this sounds of any interest to you and you need a kick up the arse, then you can subscribe at the link below. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next week.